Hello, everyone. How are you, dear students? I hope that all is well with you. I missed you all. I hope we will meet again as soon as possible. I welcome you today to our 14th lecture, which comes exactly after we have discussed the difference between objective and subjective poetry, and after having exemplified this by teaching two poems about youth and age. One was by William Shakespeare, and the other one was by Coleridge. Today we shall start with uh, objective types of poetry, and then we will move to talk about subjective types of poetry. Under the division of objective poetry, we're going to study the epic and the ballad as being the supreme types of objective poetry. First, I will start with the epic. Probably the epic is not very popular among the students because it's a very sophisticated type of objective poetry. But however, this doesn't negate the grand nature of the epic and its attraction to those who are poetry fans, let me say. Today, for our academic purposes, we are going to try and define the epic first, and after that, we are going to talk about the conventions, the types, and then a quote from one epic. Because, due to time limitations, I don't think we can have an entire epic taught in the class. So, first of all, what is an epic? What is an epic? Actually, there are many definitions, and it's not easy to find a satisfactory definition of the epic. But if we try to have a look at many definitions, we might be enlightened about the meaning of the epic. I would like to start with you by giving a sort of definition, which is more or less like a summary of the characteristics. For many scholars, the epic is a very long narrative poem. A very long narrative poem. First, it is long, and I think you understand that. You just need to know that epics can be of several thousand lines. The second thing, narrative, means that it tells a story. That's right. Now, what's the subject matter of the epic? The epic is a long narrative poem recording the heroic deeds of a hero of exceptional qualities on whose actions depend the future of a large group of people, usually a tribe, a nation, or the entire universe, if you like. So the subject matter of the epic is not like the lyric, for example, an expression of feelings. No. The subject matter is related to action and heroic acts. So heroic acts are deemed important in the theme of the epic, and not any person can be the hero in an epic. The epic hero should enjoy great qualities like um, physical as well as moral strength. And we are safely using the word hero because we need the main character of the epic to be a hero, not a protagonist, but rather a hero, a typical hero. Because this person is not going just to decide what's going to happen to him, but rather to a large group of people. He is held responsible for an entire nation, probably. Okay, so probably you have heard of some examples of poems which are identified as epics, like the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer, and these represent what we call folk epics. Epics which were written before, which were composed even before people came to know reading and writing. And if you remember when I mentioned early on the excellent example of the folk epic, which is Beowulf. Beowulf is the first English masterpiece in poetry, and it is classified as a folk epic. However, after people came to know reading and writing, and I think we will come to this again and again, we have started to see another form of the epic known as the art epic, which is an epic written by a famous writer. Because folk epics were written anonymously. We don't know exactly who composed them. So folk epics are known for anonymous authorships, whereas literary or folk or art epics are known for having been written by famous writers. So you can imagine that epics are very long and they have exceptional heroes. And we notice also that epics use a grand style of writing with a lot of figures of speech, sophisticated language, and sophisticated syntactic structure. We also notice that epics are exalted, and they use grand style, and an epic does not make any attempt to resemble common speech, but rather sophisticated types of speech. The epic is also characterized by having ample setting. The setting is not a small area, but rather a spacious area. Also, we notice that epics use a lot of advanced literary techniques. In order to write an epic, the poet needs to follow certain conventions. And here we're going to shed some light on these conventions. And after that, I am going to cite an example. Convention number one is the theme of the epic is stated in the first few lines, accompanied by a prayer to the muse. The theme of the epic is what we call proposition. So it's taken from the verb propose. Notice it is proposition, not preposition, proposition, which means that the poet should tell us about the theme of his poem. And you know, this is quite normal. We're readers, we're going to read thousands of lines. So we should know exactly what the topic is all about so that we will feel encouraged to read the poem. This will be followed by offering prayers to the muse. You know, the inspiration issue that we discussed in our first lectures about the poet needs inspiration, and the one who inspires the poet is known as the muse. So there should be a prayer to the muse, or what we call invocation of the muse. So if we think of epics that were written in the ancient times during the Romans and the Greeks, they used to invoke goddesses, and they used to invoke probably muses of poetry, like the daughters of Zeus. But later on, as we started to have, for example, a Christian epic like Milton's Paradise Lost, Milton actually used what we call a Christian muse, not a pagan muse. So this is convention number one, offering prayers to the muse and stating the theme of the epic. Number two, an epic employs certain conventional poetic devices, and this is part of the tradition. One of them is what we call the Homeric epithet. And I think you still remember the epithet as we discussed language devices. An epithet, as you remember, is a term or a phrase, sometimes lengthy, and some other times it's not lengthy, but it's applied again and again to a particular person, place, or thing. An example of an epithet is like when you say Alexander the Great. The Great is an epithet. Or when you describe the English king and say Richard the Lionheart. Richard the Lionheart. The Lionheart is an epithet. Or King Edward the Confessor. The Confessor is an epithet. So part of the traditions of writing an epic is to use epithets. And these epithets were ascribed to Homer, the Roman poet. So that's why we call it the Homeric epithet. Another device is the use of the Homeric simile. And the function of the Homeric simile is to make a comparison, actually. Some of the similes were so beautiful that they developed into poems. So the simile of the epic sometimes grows almost into an independent poem, which can be read and admired apart from the tale itself. Notice that some poets use similes so skillfully that they developed and became independent of the poem itself. So they were read for their own sake. Number three, and I have reached page 95. The action of epic is often controlled by supernatural agents. If I want to liken the epic to a type of movie, I think it would fit into an action movie. So we need supernatural beings, like in the Greek times, we can have gods and goddesses, like in Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey. For example, the sea, the god of the sea, was angry with Odysseus, so he sends him a storm tossed or something like that. There are many gods in the Greek tradition, and these gods would control the action of an epic that is a Greek epic, of course. If we are thinking of Scandinavian myths, we have Norse mythology, and Norse mythology would control the action. If we think of Christian epics, again, we have supernatural agencies which fight on both sides. Spenser's The Fairy Queen has the monster. Milton's Paradise Lost has God and Satan as characters. So it seems that it is a requirement that the action of the epic is controlled by supernatural agents. Characteristic number 4, the epic contains a number of thrilling episodes, such as the mustering of troops, battles, duels, wanderings, ordeals, and the like. So, in this respect, they are all modeled upon Homer or Virgil. Homer and Virgil are the masters of epic writing, and therefore most of the epics are modeled upon their own work. As I told you, the epic can be an action film, Therefore, we need some exciting events, some thrilling episodes. So this is exactly what we find in the epic. It's a requirement actually. Characteristic number 5, the epic is divided into books, usually 12 in number, though the Iliad and the Odyssey have 24 books each. The reduced number of the epic from 24 to 12 was adopted by the Roman writer Virgil, and he was later on followed by other European writers. If we think of English epic writers, Spenser's Fairy Queen, that I mentioned many times in my course, was planned in 12 books. Of course, it was never completed because the writer died. And the masterpiece, Paradise Lost, was raised to that number from the original 10 that Milton had in mind. So he had to raise the number of the books. I feel that it's only related to the type of the epic. If we think of folk epics, they have 12 lines. 24 books. They have 24 books. If we think of art epics, they are made up of 12 books. Now, I will go back to page 93 just to cite an example. I shall read with you the opening lines of John Milton's Paradise Lost, so that we would be able to see how he applies the conventions of the epic. This is a quote taken from Paradise Lost by John Milton, and this is from book 1. And I want you to keep this in mind because this is very important for your survey course. John Milton wrote this during a period of time when England had its civil war, when the parliamentarians fought against the royalists, and they were actually able to kill King Charles I and to exile his son Charles II to France. And for the first time in its history, Britain becomes a Commonwealth nation ruled by its parliament. Actually, what Milton did is to project this into his work Paradise Lost, exactly as he had what we call a civil war in real life. Milton imagined a civil war in heaven. Oh my God, can you imagine? Milton imagined a civil war in heaven, and this civil war was between God, his angels, and Satan and his bad angels. So Milton actually devised his epic around this kind of theme, and he said that his purpose is to explain God's ways to man. Milton tried to say that I want to interpret why God allowed man to disobey him for the first time, and he wanted to show that there is the heavenly wisdom behind this kind of unpleasant rebellion. My purpose here is to show you some of the conventions that we can find in book 1 of Milton's Paradise Lost. So please go to page 93 and have a look at the quote. Line number 1. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. With loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us, and regain the blissful seat, sing heavenly muse. In line number 1 of man's first disobedience and the fruit, Milton follows the first epic convention, which is proposition. And what do we mean by proposition? Yes, we mean stating the theme of the epic. So, what's the theme of Paradise Lost? It is to talk about the first time Adam and Eve disobeyed God. That is the first time man disobeyed God. And man here refers to the human race. So, what's the theme, guys? It is man's first disobedience. The theme is eventually the original sin. And the fruit of that forbidden tree. See here that the story revolves around the fall of Adam and Eve from heaven. So, the forbidden tree is the tree of knowledge. When God didn't want Adam and Eve to eat from the forbidden tree and warned them against disobedience, Adam and Eve actually disobeyed God and they tasted the forbidden tree. So, in line number 2, the writer describes the taste as mortal, deadly. Man was meant to be immortal, but because he ate from the forbidden fruit, he became mortal. So, its taste is mortal, it causes death. And this is what the poet says in line number 3: brought death into the world and all our woe, and our woe is our misery. That is, after the human beings ate from the forbidden tree, they started to suffer. They started to have misery. And another result was the loss of Eden. And you know what I mean by Eden here. Eden means the Garden of Eden, which is known in Arabic as Jannat Adan. So the result of eating the forbidden fruit was mortality instead of immortality, and woe instead of happiness, and most importantly, it led to the loss of Eden. And from a Christian perspective, it's the role of the great man, Jesus Christ, to restore the Christians and to regain the blissful seat. What's up with the blissful seat? What is the blissful seat? From a Christian point of view, there is the seat of honor and power at God's right hand. God wanted to give this seat to his son Jesus, but Satan desired the seat for himself. So, this is what the civil war in heaven is all about. Satan wanted the seat for himself. But the role of Jesus is to regain the blissful seat and to send us back to heaven, to restore us. Notice the word restore is loaded with meaning, because this is the time that England witnessed after the Civil War. There was restoration of monarchy in Britain when they allowed Charles II to come back to his country and to restore monarchy to England. So, similarly, we as human beings shall be restored back to heaven and we shall get back the blissful seat. So, till then, sing heavenly muse. So, is Milton's muse here a Christian or a pagan muse? Actually, Milton invented his own muse, supposedly a Christian muse that is known as Urania. Urania. So we notice that in these 6 lines, we have a lot of traditions or conventions pertaining to the epic. The first line has proposition or stating the theme. Sing Heavenly Muse, line number 6, has the invocation of the muse. This is number 2. Number 3, we have the use of epithets. You can find an epithet in line 2 with the word forbidden, mortal. Line number 4, you have a greater. Line number 5, you have blissful. So this is the third thing. Also, we notice that the language is grand and sophisticated. Okay? Now, let me here take you to page 96. There is a section that talks about the moral purpose of the epic. You know the meaning of moral, definitely, and you also know the meaning of purpose. Do epics have moral purposes? I think with this type of poetry that consists of several thousand lines, and with these highly sophisticated themes and the grand language, I think there is always a moral purpose. For example, I have always felt that the Iliad and the Trojan War issue is not basically about uh, restoring the most beautiful woman back home. I don't think the war is all about Helen of Troy as much as it is about national pride. So it is believed that the Trojan War erupted because Helen of Troy was kidnapped. But this is only skin deep. But if we want to go into a profound analysis, as many great scholars did, they found that the moral purpose that the Iliad wanted to teach us is patriotism, that is, love of your country, and to have national pride. So each kind of epic has a moral purpose. Even in Paradise Lost, I think Milton made it very clear to us that he wrote this epic to justify the ways of God to men. That is to make us understand that we always fail as human beings to um, understand the wisdom of God. And God is the one who teaches us his wisdom afterwards. Okay? Also, page 96 emphasizes that there are two types of epics, epic of growth and epic of art. Epic of growth is the same as what we call folk epic, which is the anonymous ancient form of the epic. And epic of art is written uh, writer, by famous writers in general. It is also well known that we call folk epics epics of growth because they result from natural growth in the song and the story of conscious literary effort on the part of the artist. So it is the same whether you say folk epic or epic of growth, or even if you say authentic epic. A folk epic is not the work of one man, actually. You have to keep this in mind. A folk epic is not the work of one man, because modern research shows that before being formulated into an artistic whole, it existed in fragments for long ages. And that's why, if you think of Homer, Homer is the one who collected the Iliad and the Odyssey. So there is some great poet who would put the fragments together, collect them, and then write them down as one book. A literary epic, on the other hand, is a work of art deliberately planned in the epic manner in an imitation of its original prototype. So it is a comparatively late product, like Paradise Lost by Milton, Fairy Queen by Spenser, the Aeneid by Virgil. So each literary epic is actually a product of an individual genius who felt in himself the power to rival the masters of old times. So, this is what a literary epic is basically all about. Okay. While reading about epics, you might come across something we call a mock epic. What is a mock epic? I think you are familiar with what we call a parody of something. To parody something. To parody something is to imitate it, at the same time you make fun of it. So there are mock epics and mock literary types of many things. So what is a mock epic? If you have a theme which is obviously unworthy of a serious epic, like a very ridiculous or funny uh, issue, and you try to clothe it in all the traditional conventions of the epic form, then we call this a mock epic. So the mock epic means that I have a funny, trivial, a ridiculous topic, and I have the formula or the traditions that can be followed in the epic. So I unite them and I make them one thing. So the result is going to be a mock epic. An excellent example would be Battle of the Frogs and the Mice. And this is a Greek parody of the Iliad. Imagine, instead of speaking about the great heroes of the Iliad, we speak about frogs and mice. The best example that I really love is the finest example of a mock epic, which is Alexander Pope's Rape of the Lock. I think you will laugh soundly if you read The Rape of the Lock, in which the writer actually talks about kidnapping a lock of hair from the head of a woman. Her name is Belinda, instead of speaking about kidnapping Helen of Troy. And instead of having the rally of forces and swords and such stuff, you will see Belinda facing her mirror and using her toiletries. And I think you will laugh. So the mock epic is a parody of the epic form. It is often written in a very comic way. Okay, here we come to the end of our lecture, which covered the epic and its conventions. Next time, inshallah, we will focus on the second form of objective poetry, which is the ballad. Thank you very much for your attentiveness and patience with me. Thank you very much. Remember to write your comments and the questions under the video. And please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any difficulties. Thank you very much. See you next time, inshallah.